योगेन चित्तस्य पदेन वाचां मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोत्तं प्रवरं मुनीनां पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि आबाहुपुरुषाकारं शङ्खचक्रासिधारिणं सहस्रशिरसं श्वेतं प्रणमामि पतञ्जलिं गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुः साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः हरिः ओम. So we are at Sutra 2.18. prakāśakriyāsthitiśīlaṃ bhūtendriyātmakaṃ bhogāpavargārthaṃ dṛśyam. We have already begun on the Vyasabhashya and seen quite a bit of it. Specifically, in this somewhat long sutra that is touching upon several aspects, we have seen the first part, the prakāśakriyāsthitiśīlaṃ. So we have seen what are gunas, what is their Swarupa and Svabhava, how they operate, and what is their form and nature. And now we'll be looking at the next part. Before commencing on that, we have to always remember the context in which we are. So we are looking at the Yoga Shastra in a manner parallel to the Chikitsa Shastra. So just as in medicine, as we have seen, there is Roga, disease, Roga Hetu, cause of the disease. There is the absence of disease, Arogyam, and the means to the absence of disease, Bhaishajam, medicine. Similarly, it is said in Yoga, that is the Heya, the thing to be gotten rid of or overcome, which in this case is Dukkha. Heya Hetu, the cause of the Heya. And then Hanam, the state of the absence of the Heya. And Hanopayaha, the means to do so. So we are looking at Heya Hetuhu, where it was said that dṛśya and drashta, their sanyoga is the Heya Hetu, coming together of the seen and the seer. And there is a specific nature to the sanyoga. Then we said, okay, then what is this dṛśya? And that is what this particular sutra is about. It is characterizing the dṛśyam. So prakāśakriyāsthitiśīlaṃ bhūtendriyātmakaṃ bhogāpavargārthaṃ dṛśyam. Now let us continue on the Vyasabhashya. We've also seen a little bit of why it is called the dṛśyam. Now incidentally, that is a very interesting choice of terms that Patanjali has chosen. He has not said Prakriti and Purusha or Atma and Maya or Atma and Prakriti or any such thing. It is specifically the words chosen are dṛśya and drashta, the seer and the seen. It is very apt in this context and in this Sankhya Yoga scheme. Anything else like Atma or Jiva, it brings in facets that are not essential in this particular model and may also cause confusion, because Atma essentially means self, therefore has a connotation of I-ness and so on. Whereas as we know in this scheme, the I-ness is an emergent property of the coupled system. It is because of the interaction of the dṛśya and the drashta that due to the pratibimba or the reflection that the asmita emerges, and that is the vyavaharika I-ness that is seen. So using the word Atma can cause confusion there, and therefore the drashta and dṛśyam is the seen, specifically all the things that can have an impression on the chitta, which therefore gets reflected or echoed in the drashta or the seer. And that is why the word dṛśya is used. So that is also something to think about as we look at this framework, as well as one studies the various darshanas, how the choice of term helps and aids in understanding and how things are carefully chosen. So now let us continue. So Vyasa, last time we had seen, it's etad dṛśyam ityuchyate. This is known as dṛśyam, and we won't go into that, and we'll continue. So he says tad etad dṛśyam bhūtendriyātmakam. So the bhūtendriyātmakam is directly from the Sutra, because prakāśakriyāsthitiśīlaṃ bhūtendriyātmakam. So Vyasa is saying tad etad dṛśyam bhūtendriyātmakam bhūtabhāvena prativyādīna sūkṣmasthaleena parinamate. Sūkṣmasthūlena parinamate. So this dṛśya, it is made up of bhuta and indriya, bhūtendriyātmakam. So now a little bit about the bhutas. So it says bhuta bhavena, in terms of the bhuta, prativyādina, by the means of prithvi, etc. That is referring to prithvi, aap, teja, vayu, akash, which is in English known as earth element, water element, fire element, and so on. So prativyādina, by the prithvi, etc. Sūkṣmasthūlena. So it can be sukshma, subtle, or sthula, which is gross. So prativyādina sukshmasthūlena parinamate. Parinamate means transforms. So the dṛśya undergoes transformation. That is also is given here, and it transforms by one of the ways is bhuta bhavena, in terms of the bhuta or the elements. Which bhutas? Prativyādina, and which can be subtle or gross. Now in some of the other schemes, there is this notion of paramāṇu, the atomic element, which is not directly referenced in Sankhya Yoga. However, because in Sankhya Yoga there is no fundamental entity of anu for Prithvi, etc., because everything is made up of gunas, and everything is coming through the transformations of the guna complex. However, there is a clear recognition of something being sthula and sukshma, and that we can see here. Sukshma sthulena parinamate. Okay. Now, tathendriya bhavena, similarly, in terms of indriyas. So we have seen the bhutas in tathendriya bhavena, shrotradina. Shrotra, chakshu, tvak, etc. are indriyas. The indriya of hearing, the indriya of seeing, the indriya of touch, the indriya of rasana, so the taste, and ghrana, the indriya of smell. Tatha indriya bhavena shrotradina sukshma sthulena parinamate iti. Again, over there also there is the subtle, and then there is the gross, which is the manifest, visible, physical aspect of the indriyas. It transforms into that. So this dṛśya is undergoing transformation. The fundamental entities is just the gunas, and through transformation, all of these things are happening. There is the bhuta bhava and the indriya bhava. And then he says tattu na aprayojanam. So it is not happening on its own without purpose. So this is again, as we had said, the teleological aspect. Tattu na aprayojanam apitu prayojanam urarikritya pravartate iti. So it is not aprayojanam. It is not without purpose. It is not happening, so to speak, randomly without any purpose. However, apitu prayojanam urarikritya. Urarikritya means having adopted or accepted. Having adopted a certain prayojanam, a certain purpose, only then it pravartate. Means only then it transforms and exists. Iti. Bhogāpavargārthaṃ hi tad dṛśyam purushasyeti. So this is now the third aspect of the sutra. The bhogāpavargārthaṃ is also coming into the bhashya for elaboration. So that is the prayojanam aspect. So bhogāpavargārthaṃ hi, it is for the bhoga and apavarga. And bhogāpavargārthaṃ hi tad dṛśyam, this dṛśya, purushasya iti. So purushasya is something known as a shashti vibhakti. Now the shashti vibhakti is it is a word form it is a word grammatical form, the Purushasya. It is in general, it is a Sambandha Vachakaha. Often the Shashti Vibhakti is considered as it is his, mine. But that is one of the Sambandha. The Shashti is a Samanya Sambandha Vachakaha. So it expresses a relation. So in this case, in terms of being the dṛśya being, or the purpose of the dṛśya being the Purusha, or more specifically the bhoga and the apavarga of the Purusha, therefore dṛśya is said to be, now in English we will say of the Purusha, but here we can say related to the Purusha also. So both ways of elaborating are valid. And tad dṛśyam purushasya iti. So there the dṛśya is in direct relation with the Purusha, because essentially all the transformations or the activity happening in the dṛśya is purely because of having adopted the prayojanam of the bhoga and apavarga of the Purusha, and that itself is that prayojanam guides each and every transformation of the dṛśyam, and therefore tadartham hi dṛśyam purushasya iti. Therefore it is said that the dṛśya is purushasya.
So the Prakriti is being described in its functional form. The earlier part of the Sutra, prakāśakriyāsthitiśīlaṃ, was primarily to describe the essential form of the Prakriti, the creative cause, that it is of the nature of sattva, raja, tama. And in Patanjali's language, prakāśakriyāsthiti. So that's a kind of essential nature of the three gunas, namely sattva, raja, tama, for prakāśakriyāsthiti. Now, when there are these, the essential nature is for what purpose? It is not for itself. The essential nature of it is to operate as creative cause of entire universe. And then, how does this operate? It operates in two ways. One is bhautika way, the other one is indriyātmaka way. Bhūtendriyātmakaṃ. So the bhutas means the elements. Elements means the matter, the material aspect in the creation. There are only 5 elements which are constituting this gross phenomenal universe. They are element of earth, element of water, element of fire, element of air, element of space. So, Prithvi, Ap, Tej, Vayu, Akash are the 5 elements. And in this universe, all that is manifesting is nothing but out of the 5 elements. That these 5 elements are material cause, constituting cause, source cause, making cause for the entire universe. Right from our embodiment to all those celestial bodies in the form of planets and stars and nebulae and galaxies. Everything is of the nature of 5 elements. And then these bhutas and indriyas, what we call as sentient creation, a creation and insentient creation. Now, when we classify the creation in 2 parts as living and non-living, sentient and insentient, that insentient aspect is primarily of the nature of bhutas. And the living creation is a combination of the two, because living creation must have body, embodiment, and also senses. The senses are, as we know, the 5 senses, cognitive senses, and then internal senses of the nature of mind organ. So this is characteristic of the living part of creation, or animate part of creation, or sentient part of creation. that there is a mind and there are mental functions and agencies for mental functions through the senses. Apart from that, there is no aspect of creation which is neither bhūtātmak nor indriyātmak nor bhūtendriyātmakaṃ. Either it should be of the nature of elements or it should be of the nature of element and sensory combinations. We don't have any creation which is merely sensory creation. Because the senses must have a body. Otherwise the senses won't exist or not even function. So either there is bhautika srishti or bhūtendriyātmaka srishti. There is no third kind of srishti. There is no third kind of creation. Either it is bhautik or it is combination. That means the Prakriti unfolds in its cosmological unfoldment in two forms. One is bhautika srishti, the other one is bhūtendriyātmaka srishti. So that is how the Prakriti manifests. That is why this part of the sutra, the second part of the sutra, the first is prakāśakriyāsthitiśīlaṃ, of the nature of, bhūtendriyātmakaṃ, the functional form of it, the function and operative form of it, the operations of it, manifestations of it. That's the second part of the sutra. The bhogāpavargārthaṃ is the third part of the sutra. So the dṛśyam is being described, which is the last term of the sutra. The dṛśyam is described comprehensively in three aspects. Shīlam, the nature, the kriya, the function, and purpose. That's the third part of the sutra, which we have not still touched. So the second part of the sutra is bhūtendriyātmaka. Now the bhutas, the elements, are again of the two classes, two grades. One is phenomenal physical universe, which is tangible, which is graspable, which is perceivable. And the second part is subtle. So sthula and sukshma. The sthula is physical and sukshma is metaphysical. Sukshma means not microscopic, because microscopic is also gross. What you see from under a microscope is gross, because it can be seen. Having taken under the microscope, you can see it. So you can cognize it, you can perceive it, you can sense it, you can feel it. So that's all gross. From macroscopic to microscopic, it's all gross. But there is something beyond microscopic, beyond any scopy, which is not a visual object, which is not a tactile object, which is not a gustatory object, which is not an olfactory object. So that is a very subtle form of bhutas, that is sukshma bhutas. And that's why Vyasa clarifies this. This dṛśyam is bhūtendriyātmakaṃ and bhūtarūpena prithivādi sthula sukshma. Prithvi, up, tej, vayu, akash are in both forms, physical form and metaphysical form. That is sthula form and sukshma form. That is the gross form and subtle form. Subtle not in the sense very, very, very microscopic, but metaphysical. So sukshma bhutas are the tanmatras, which is the description which comes in the subsequent part of this topic, dṛśyam. Dṛśya category has two sutras here, so that will be described later. But they are called tanmatras, that only, tanmatra. So that is sukshma bhutas. So we can understand the sthula bhutas are tangible. You can grasp them, you can sense them, you can feel them, either with naked perceptive faculty or assisted faculties, assisted instruments such as microscope to telescopes to electron microscope to Hubble telescope to etc. While the Sukshma will not come under any of those. Therefore it is called metaphysical. That's the metaphysics in the Sutra. Similarly, the Indriyas. So we know the Indriyas, 5 Indriyas, Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha. For these 5 objects, there are 5 senses, which are called cognitive senses, which are called Jnanendriyas. So that's the sthula form, that's the gross form. And then also subtle form of the senses. So the gross senses, we know that these are the senses which are on our face. And the tactile organ is all over the body. But the eyes are in our head region, ears are in the head region, nose in the head region, the tongue in the head region, face region. So that's the sensory complex. Now these senses can be seen, can be perceived, and they are quite gross. But the internal organ of the mind and psyche and consciousness cannot come under a microscope. They will only come under wisdom scope. The wisdom only will reveal as to how the internal organs, the subtle organs are. Anyway, the body has 2 forms, gross and subtle body. If you recall, when it was mentioned that Sthula Sharira, Sukshma Sharira, Karana Sharira, that means there is some subtle aspect of body which is not object for our eyes and our senses. It is subtle. Similarly, the senses have gross form and subtle form. And we will come to know about the subtle form of the senses and the entire gross and subtle form of the senses, which are actually 5 forms, which will come in the 3rd chapter. So therefore, we don't have to consider that right here. But our internal organ is not a visible organ. It has to be inferred. Internal organ is inferred, or there is some thought process with which you can accept the existence of internal organ. You can extrapolate the internal organ by some functions carried out. So there are gross and subtle senses, gross and subtle elements, and therefore Vyasa explains the bhūtendriyātmakaṃ srishti on the both planes, the gross and subtle. Now, why is this creation? Is it just the play of Prakriti? Like, we see that infants are moving their limbs and we don't see any purpose why the baby is moving the limbs, why the infant is moving the limbs. It's but natural for the baby to move the limbs. Once the baby is in a wakeful state, invariably it will start moving the limbs. It will not keep the limbs still. It will start moving. And that's very natural. So is it something of that nature that there is no purpose but the Prakriti is triggered to be functional? No, that is not true. There is always a function because there is an archetypal mind behind the creation, and it cannot allow something like that to be non-functional and just be operating and operating and operating and functioning and functioning and functioning. So, all the unfoldment of the Prakriti, we will see how Prakriti will be unfolding in the next sutra. The whole entire unfoldment of the Prakriti is with prayojanam. That's the teleology. It is with prayojana. So this is the 3rd part of the sutra, which is teleological component of the sutra. So, purpose of itself or what? Because the baby will be moving the limbs, perhaps one can argue it is for its own purpose, because then it will get the muscle tone, it will circulation, etc. for itself. the blood will circulate, the limbs will start moving, the muscles will be developed in the limbs, and then the hands and legs can become functional. Then is it its own purpose? Is it for its own purpose that it is unfolding or it is operating? No. Basically, there is a purpose. And the purpose of whom? There is no purpose of itself. There is no purpose of itself, in itself, for itself, by itself, but purpose of the other category of sanyoga, which is drashta. So we have seen two categories, drashta, dṛśya categories. So this dṛśya category is working, operating, evolving, devolving, functioning for the prayojana of the drashta, purushasya prayojanam. And therefore it is not just working something as something very natural, spontaneous, etc., the organic functioning, etc., but it is functioning for something else, the other category, not just something else, the other category, the opposite category, which is in counterposition of it. That is the drashta. And that is the purpose is for Purusha. The Purusha Tattva, the sentient principle. It is the purpose of Purusha that it is operating. Now what is that purpose? Two purposes. Bhogāpavargārthaṃ. Bhogam means to have experience of the world inside and around. To experience the world, which will be either giving pain, pleasure, or delusion. Identify if there is anything of the third nature. Try to ponder over it, whether there is any other function, kind of experience for a life beyond sukha, dukkha, moha, or combination thereof, or different proportions of those. So that is bhogam, experience. And apavargārthaṃ. Apavargārthaṃ means that which is means of liberation. There is spiritual samam bonam. Either serve the material purpose of life, and then otherwise serve the transcendent purpose of life, which is spiritual samam bonam. That is apavarga. And that means the conjunction is taking place for both the reasons. It's not just for negative reasons that it makes us suffer. It's not only for heyam, it's also for apavarga as well. And that's the purpose. So it is not purposeless. It is not its own purpose. It is not purpose of something else. It is purpose of the counterpositioned drashta, counterpositioned Purusha Tattva. So that is what Vyasa has mentioned in this two sentences of his commentary. Okay.
So the dṛśya, as was being explained, the purpose is the bhoga and apavarga of the Purusha. And like he said, the entire universe is actually the prakriti or the evolution of the gunas. And therefore we can look at it as a dṛśya for the bhoga apavarga of an individual Purusha, as well as the entire creation as a whole for the bhoga and apavarga of the various Purushas as well. Okay, so I mean, like it says in the Sankhya Karika, Janana Marana Karananam Pratiniyamat Ayugapat Pravruttescha Purusha Bahutvam Siddham Triganya Viparyayachaiva. So without explaining this entire Karika Vakyam, essentially what it is saying is, because of different birth, life experiences, death, and so on, the Purusha Bahutvam, the multiplicity of the Purusha, is established in the Sankhya. And also because the Traigunya Viparyayat, because it is so different from the Trigunas, the metaphysical nature of the Purusha. And then it says, Tasmacha Viparyasat Siddham Sakshitvam Asya Purushasya. So by this and complete difference from the three gunas of the Purusha, the Sakshitvam, the witnessivity, or the Drashtritvam, so as we are seeing the seer, that also is established. Sakshitvam Asya Purushasya Kaivalyam Madhyasthyam Drashtritvam Akartrubhavascha. So we will see all of this in the Yoga Sutra and the Bhashya as well. I just wanted to draw, and I was reminded by this about the discussion about the similar words in the Sankhya Karika, and also wanted to point out how the Prayojanam can be seen in the context of an individual Purusha as well as the overall Bhoga and Apavarga of the several Purushas, and then the Prakriti function and acting accordingly. So now to continue.
Sir, before we proceed, one more thing. One might question, how can the Prakriti work for all the entire manifestation from monad to Brahma, Brahma Stambha Pariyanta? Because in this creation we see the things around us, the things on the planet, the things on the solar system, the very solar system, there are so many planets, there are so many satellites. So from the Sun to Pluto, there are so many aspects in the solar family. Then there is a universe beyond the solar system. We have got the galaxy, our own Milky Way. Then there are so many galaxies. There are so many stars and planets and nebulae and so many things in this creation. How is it that there's only one cause called Prakriti? That's why it is called creative cause. It is such a versatile cause. So, for a very, very, very materialistic person, money is everything. For a materialistic person, the money is everything. Money can help him get all that he wants or she wants. That is what is stark materialism. And then its idea of the money. The money is everything for them. Whatever services they want, whatever pleasures they want, whatever they want to avoid, whatever they want to be averting, whatever they want to be getting, accepting, rejecting, everything they think by money it is possible. This is what is stark materialism is, that it believes in that wealth can do anything or money can do anything. For metaphysicists, the reality is revealed, that Prakriti, that's why it is called Prakriti. That's why it is called creative cause. It is such a versatile cause. From barest monad to even the very creator person in the archetypal scheme, Brahma, Brahma Stambha Pariyanta, that is from blade of grass or dust particle to everything, from dust particle to huge star, 100 or 1,000 or million times larger than the sun, the whole material cause is Prakriti. And the entire creation is with a purpose. Otherwise, many of us think, that there is no life on the moon, there is no life on Mars, there is no life on Pluto, there is no life on Sun, there is no life elsewhere. Life is only on the planet. And therefore, we don't see any purpose for Purusha. So here we should know that the entity of Purusha is not only of the life principle that we see on the planet, it is one kind of biology on the planet. The metaphysics tells us that that is not the case. The life is also on the sun. Now this might be absurd for you. That is why in Bhagavad Gita, you come across a verse that the soul cannot be burned, cannot be wetted, cannot be dried, etc., cannot be cut, etc. Why is that metaphysical principle like that? If it cannot be burnt, it can as well be on the sun. It will not be having our kind of body because it is not our kind of biology which will subsist on sun, but it will have its own kind of biology. It will have its own embodiment. There will be a fiery body. So the Purusha, the Atma Tattva on the sun will have fiery body. Now fire cannot burn fire. Fire will live in fire. So the multitudinal Purushas that just now Sri told you about, Anekatva, that there are multitudinal entities of the caliber of Drashta. And this life is very rare. It is very terrestrial perspective that we say there is no life elsewhere. There is no life of this kind elsewhere. That doesn't mean there is no life elsewhere. So, the Prakriti in any form, in any place in this vast universe is there to serve a Purusha Tattva. This is a metaphysicist view. And for today's man, it will be absurd. It will be nonsense to say that there is life on the sun. Another thing, we are saying that it is all Anadi. Prakriti Purusha Anadi. Vasana Anadi. It's all time beginningless. We all say beginningless. There was a question asked to me that this Earth planet is only 4.5 billion years old. There was no Earth before 4.5 billion years. The sun was not there before 4.5 billion years. That's the age of the sun and that's the age of the planet today. Then how could there be human being when there was no sun and no earth? If there was no human being, then where is the question of any vasanas? See, today we are trying to explore, discover Earth-like planet, either in our galaxy or perhaps even out of galaxy. We are trying to see a condition whereby our kind of life can be sustained. But then there are several kinds of lives. So the biology of the ancient wisdom of the Lord tells us about something very, very different. This is quite awe-inspiring. If you don't look at it as a ridiculous kind of idea, it will be really fascinating. So there is life everywhere. Purpose of life is served everywhere. Entire universe. Everywhere there is purpose of life principles served. This is what the Sankhya philosophy, metaphysics tells us. It's very naive and narrow view to believe that only life is on the planet. Our kind of life is only on the planet. Our kind of life is not on Mars. Our kind of life will not be on the sun. Our kind of life will not be in Andromeda. Or perhaps in the entire our galaxy also. But then we are trying to search Earth in our galaxy, any planet, celestial body like Earth, where there is water, where there is sustenance of life of our kind. That's why there are 8.4 millions of yonis. There are not only yonis on the planet. There are lives elsewhere also. And later in Patanjali's treatise, Vyasa commentary, Bhuvana Jnanam Surya Sanyamat, in the 3rd chapter, Bhuvanam, 14 Bhuvanas are explained, and in every Bhuvana there is life of different kinds. We say somebody, a yogi, lives on air. You and me don't live on air. But we hear about it, we believe that yes, there are some yogis who just live on air. What kind of yogi that can be? So when we have something like that, we all think our oxygen is life force. But on the planet itself, we see that there is some life which lives on carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide for them is pranavayu, life force, the botanical world. So we have such diverse conditions here itself. We all, animals and creatures and insects live on oxygen, but then there is botanical life which is taking oxygen and giving away, taking carbon dioxide and giving away oxygen. So what is carbon dioxide to us is oxygen to them. What is oxygen to us is carbon dioxide is oxygen for them. So even on the planet we have such a kind of srishti, such a kind of creation. The point is, entire creation has a purpose, and not anybody's purpose or something's purpose or somebody's purpose. It is purpose of Purusha. This is what Patanjali has postulated in this sutra. Let us take a wider view of it and not just believe that he's only dealing with the life on the planet. No, it's a subject of metaphysics. So entire universe, not even a microscopic, square millimeter part of it is purposeless. Everything is with purpose and purpose of the Purusha. That's the metaphysical subject of teleology. Okay.
Yeah, just on this discussion, a couple of things. So once again, when it says that the Prakriti as the cause of the universe, that also has to be carefully understood, because as he was saying, it is a material cause. So everything is made up of gunas, that is what it is said. And the cause, as we have seen, it is the sanyoga, the Purusha and the Prakriti coming together. That is the inspiring cause of the transformations of the Prakriti. So the creation is as a result of the sanyoga, as per the Sankhya Yoga description of it. Of course, there's a similar thing, but if you look at how the Vedanta describe it, it will say all of this is Brahma, the Brahma Tattva. And then there are some more theoretical variations around this. But again, we have to understand the metaphysical principle, the Purusha, and the material principle constituted by the gunas. Their sanyoga is the sort of the inspirational cause or the nimitta karanam, and the gunas are the material cause, upadana karanam, and that is to be understood carefully. It is slightly nuanced to understand that. The other thing, to digress slightly, like he was saying, life in the sun and the fiery creatures and so on. So again, that reminded me. So there is this Tarka Sangraha based on the Nyaya Vaisheshika systems and further evolutions of that, where in that it is a highly logical kind of a explanation, because it is a Nyaya Shastra, and there is a Uddesha Grantha and a Lakshana Grantha. So individual terms are mentioned, defined, characterized, and the Lakshana is given. Now the Lakshanam is something somewhat unique to the Indian system. To describe anything, it is the Lakshanam that has to be given. So which is the Asadharanam. So for a class of object, what is it that distinguishes that from the rest? That is the Lakshanam. So in the Nyaya system, if you were asked what is a cow, you don't have to say it has 4 legs, 2 horns and so on, because that is common to many other things other than the cow as well. So that is called the Ativyapti dosha. So you have to pinpoint the thing that is there in the cow and the cow alone and nowhere else. So there then it says the sasna, the part of the fleshy part under the neck or the throat, known as the dewlap. So that is the Lakshanam for the cow. So that is the Lakshana Grantha, where very carefully the Lakshanas have to be identified, because if it is more than the set of objects we are aiming for, it is Ativyapti dosha. If it is less, it is Avyapti dosha, and there is a lot of detailed discussion on that. Okay, now from there is in the Tarka Sangraha, there is the Lakshana of Prithvi, Apa, Teja and so on given. So for Prithvi it will say Gandhavati Prithvi, Sadvivida, Nitya Anitya cha, Nitya Paramanu Rupa, Anitya Karya Rupa, Punastrivida, Sharirendriya Vishaya Vedat. So now I won't give the meaning of the rest, but it says for the Prithvi, it is Trividha of 3 types. Sharirendriya Vishaya Vedat, the Shariram, the Indriya and the Vishayas, the objects of the senses. Then Shariram Asmadadinam. The Shariram is of the type of people like us, it says. Indriyam Gandagrahakam Granam, Tatcha Nasagravarti, Vishayo Mrutpashanadihi. So the Indriya, Prithvi is made up of sense of smell, and so that is the Indriya. and the Vishaya is all the mud and stones and everything, it is all Prithvi and so on. Now interestingly, if you look at Apa, the Lakshanam is Shita Svarshavatyaha Apaha. It has a cold touch. Again, Tadvividha, Nitya, Nitya Cha, Nitya Paramanu Rupa, Anitya Karya Rupa, Punastrivida, Sharirendriya Vishaya Vedat, Shariram Varuna Loke. So here the conception is, in the Varuna Loka, which is different from the Prithvi Loka, there the being Sharira is made up of Apa, it says. So that relates to what he was saying, like in the sun, there will be fiery elements. So that comes next. Ushna Sparshavat Tejaha. So Teja or fire element is something that has a hot touch. That is the Lakshanam. And it exactly describes it. And there is a whole, in the commentaries, you will see why it does not fall into anything other than the Teja, and it completely covers the Teja. Again, Tachadvividam, Nityam Anityam Cha, Nityam Paramanu Rupam, Anityam Karya Rupam, Punastrivida, Sharirendriya Vishaya Vedat. Now, Shariram Aditya Loke Prasiddham. So, the Teja Sharira is in the Aditya Loka. So, it is very similar to what was just being described as fiery things in the sun and so on. So, this kind of a conception you will see in various different darshanas as well, and very clearly mentioned in terms of Prithvi Aap Teja, the Varuna Loke, even in the very realist philosophies like the Nyaya Vaisheshika, where it says Aditya Loke Tejomayam Shariram. Okay. Now, going back to the Vyasa Bhashya, Vyasa will next cover the Bhoga and Apavarga, and will give very succinct and beautiful definitions of what is this Bhoga and what is this Apavarga. So he says, Tatra Ishtanishta Gunaswarupavadharanam Avibhagapannam Bhogaha. So again, let's understand what is Bhoga. Ishta Anishta Gunaswarupa Avadharanam Avibhagapannam Bhogaha. So the Gunaswarupa, the state or the form of the gunas which are ever changing, whether Ishta or Anishta. So it is, so there will typically, there is this, I mean, looking at it as though it is either favorable or unfavorable, Ishta Anishta Gunaswarupa. So characterizing the Gunaswarupa as favorable or unfavorable. And Avadharanam means sort of affirmation. Ayam ithameva avadharanam. To say this is of this nature, this is of this kind. So this kind of avadharanam, that considering any Gunaswarupa, classifying it as Ishta and Anishta, as favorable or unfavorable, something I like or don't like, that kind of an affirmation, avadharanam, avibhagapannam, without having gone through the vibhaga or viveka of the Purusha from the Gunas, or Purusha from the Prakriti, without having that. So it is therefore Purushena Saha Aviviktam. So the viveka between the Purusha and the Prakriti is, or Purusha and the Drashta and the Dṛśya is not being made. And the Gunaswarupas are being affirmed as favorable, unfavorable, or Sukhatmakam, Dukkhatmakam and so on. That is Bhogaha. So it is, the definition is being given by stripping all the non-essentials and only in terms of fundamental terms. Tatra Ishta Anishta Gunaswarupa. So it is not being said as things or situations. What it's saying is Gunaswarupa. Ishta Anishta Gunaswarupa Avadharanam. Ishta Anishtabhyam Gunaswarupasya Avadharanam. Affirmation by way of calling it favorable and unfavorable. Avibhagapannam, without having the viveka, is known as Bhogaha. And in contradistinction, what is Apavarga? Bhoktuhu Swarupa Avadharanam Apavarga iti. So, Bhoktuhu Swarupa. So, instead of the Guna Swarupa being affirmed as Ishta, Anishta and so on, if the Swarupa of the Bhokta, the Bhoktru Swarupa or Bhoktuhu Swarupa. So, the Bhokta is the seer here, the Drishta, which is the Purusha. Its Swarupa, if that is what is affirmed in the Chitta, rather than looking at the Guna Swarupa or the Dṛśya things and calling it Sukhatmakam, Dukkhatmakam and all of that, leaving that aside, if only the Bhokta's Swarupa or the Drishta's Swarupa is affirmed, Avadharanam, again, Ayam Ithameva, this is of this kind only. and that is what is being affirmed, then it becomes apavarga. So in a very simple way and a very essential way, the bhoga and apavarga is being defined. So here the terms like mukti, liberation, etc. are not being used here so as to be able to exactly pinpoint what happens during bhoga, what happens during apavarga. And iti dvayoho atiriktam anyad darshanam nasti. So this is again an important affirmation. Other than these two, there is no third darshanam. Darshanam is the sort of a state of seeing, because here everything is being characterized in terms of drashta, dṛśya and darshana. Right? So those are the terms being used. So this state of this kind of seeing, it's only one of these two. It will either be the Guna Swarupa being affirmed as Ishta and Anishta, or it will be the Bhoktru Swarupa being affirmed. And other than these two, there is nothing else. If it is the former, it is Bhogaha. If it is the latter, it is Apavarga. And therefore, he quotes, Vyasa quotes, it says, Tathacha Uktam, Ayam tu khalu trishu guneshu, kartrushu, akartare cha purushe, tulya tulya jatiye chaturthe, tat kriya sakshini upaniyamanan, sarva bhavan upapannan, anupashyan, na darshanam anyach shankate iti. So this, I think we'll take a pause. This is again a long sentence. I'll describe that next.
So, tatra ishtanishta gunaswarupa avadharanam. Ishtanishta means conducive, non-conducive, acceptable, not acceptable, favorable, unfavorable. These are our experiences. Either something is favorable or not favorable, conducive or not conducive, acceptable or rejectable. And avadharanam. Avadharanam, the word again has another meaning, which is of the nature of, say for example, the undescribable. The experience is there, but then experience is so subjectivistic that it cannot be worded. Like you can taste sugar, but cannot describe the taste of sugar. You can taste jaggery, but cannot describe the taste of jaggery. You can take fragrance of rose, but you cannot describe the fragrance of rose. So, that is how the bhoga is. It is so subjectivistic that you cannot really justifiably describe. And then it is avibhagapanna. When you identify yourself with that, whatever experience you have, the experience will be either pleasure or pain, more or less of pleasure or more or less of pain, or delusion, sukha dukkha moha. But when you identify yourself with it, when you say, I am happy by taking fragrance of rose, I am happy by tasting jaggery, I am happy by tasting sugar. So when you become that is the avibhagapanna. You don't say that my body had a pain. You say I had a pain. You don't say my senses had happiness or my body had happiness. You say I had happiness. That means we indistinctly look at the experiencer and the instrument of experiencing. These are all instruments of experiencing through which we get the bhoga, etc. The sukha dukkha moha, etc. Through the instruments we get them, but then we identify ourselves. That is avibhagapannam. So when you indistinctly take it as if it is your own experience, my pleasure, my pain, my sorrow, my delight, I am delighted, I am sorrowed, then that is called indistinction. That is bhoga. So just the indistinction between the experiencer and the agency of experience, when you have indistinction, that is bhoga. And when you have the distinction, then you don't say it is your experience. then that is the distinction, or that's the viveka. When you get there is a viveka coming out of it, by the experience of life, whatever experience you are getting, if you give, it gives a distinction to you, what is called as viveka, atma and atma viveka, the me and mine distinctly seen, the me and that distinctly seen, me and experience distinctly seen, that is viveka. Then that is Swarupa avadharanam. Now how does it happen? It is only by self-realization. So self-realization is distinction between the seer and seen, the drashta and dṛśya. So like a wise man doesn't get tormented for what happens to him, and if the same thing happens to us, we are tormented. So that is the viveka. That is because of the self-knowledge. He knows that the self is not the experiencer. But I just now, Srini told you, it is a witness. It is the witnessivity in him, and not getting the attachment of the experience onto him. That is the apavarga. So the conjunction, the function, the manifestation of gunas is for these two purposes. And now this is defining succinctly the two, bhoga and apavarga. A comprehensive definition, tatra ishtanishta guna swarupa avadharanam avibhagapannam bhogaha, and bhoktu swarupa avadharana apavarga iti. Knowing the one's self itself, where there is no a worldly experience of happiness even. Otherwise we say self, experiencing the self is a bliss, etc. But it is not that happiness. It is seeing the distinction. It is seeing the transcendence. That is apavarga. So he has defined the bhoga apavarga, the purpose of gunas to operate. And this is precisely the definition. Look at a very brief description, and with no defect of the nature of over-pervasiveness, under-pervasiveness, etc., etc. So I just now, Srini told you about definition. What is definition? Definition or definition. So it is fitting that qualification of definition. So it is briefly described by him. So those are the two purposes in life. Either experience the life or experience the self, which is sought after by a spiritual seeker. The spiritual seeker doesn't seek all pleasures of the world and world above, world beyond, but seeks what is called a self-realization. Those are the purposes of Prakriti, either to serve the supreme purpose, which is spiritual summum bonum, or the mundane, worldly, terrestrial, celestial purpose of taking enjoyments or experiencing what the world is, what the universe is. So that is bhoga. Okay.
Okay. So I just quoted a line that Vyasa himself has quoted. So that I think we'll take next time, because there are some terms there which are worth delving into for some explanation. So we'll continue the bhashya on this sutra in the next session. So we'll stop here. We'll recite the slokas on Guruji and stop. Vaijñānikam pravaktritva asaneshu kalavidam योगाभ्यासे च तत्त्वज्ञं वन्देऽहं सुन्दरं गुरुं योगवृक्षो हि लोकेऽस्मिन् यत्प्रेरणेन वर्धितः योगाचार्य गुरो तुभ्यं सुन्दराय नमो नमः. Thank you.
Namaskar all of you. Thank you very much.